Mr. Batten, please.
Thank you, Claude. First of all, thank you for Mr. BENSTEIN for that technical presentation that he gave, and he answered one of my questions, which was that nobody actually seems to know where the terrorists actually got their weapons from and whether they were genuine or deactivated. So we're none the wiser on that. My questions are more aimed towards the Commission in the nature of the proposed directive. I've had some very concerned correspondence from my constituents in the form of the Imperial War Museum, the National Army Museum and the Royal Armies, who are concerned that the way it's currently worded, it would actually destroy the authenticity of their collections for historical purposes, for testing purposes, and, for example, they are given weapons by the British Army that they've captured from their enemies in the various conflicts that they're still involved in, and that's very necessary for understanding your opponents in the war and how good their weapons are. Also, this affects private collectors and will destroy the authenticity of their weapons, for example, wheel locks, flint locks and percussion caps. And I wonder how many terrorist or criminal acts have been perpetrated using a flintlock. Probably not many, I would guess. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to the Paris attacks, and it's actually attacking the symptoms of the problem and not the actual cause. In the directive, I don't want to see any directive at all on a European-wide level. Every country, as we've heard, have got different circumstances and different requirements, but at the very least there should be an exemption for museums and collections, for example, in stately homes, and indeed for private collectors of antique weapons. And what about shotgun owners, farmers and people who use shotguns for private use and sporting purposes? We tried something like this in the UK. You may remember the Dunblane massacre, I think it was in the late 1990s, when a number of school children were slain by a paedophile using, I think, including a handgun, and Tony Blair rushed through legislation to ban the ownership of handguns. It destroyed the private sporting uses of handguns and handgun clubs, but it had actually absolutely no effect on criminals. And of course, it's only the law-abiding that obey the laws and not the criminals. They still have no problem in obtaining weapons, and gun crime has actually gone up in the UK since those measures come in. What I'd like to do is to conclude by saying that I think that this directive will penalise the law-abiding more than the criminals and the terrorists, and it doesn't attack the root cause of the problem, which is open borders to Eastern Europe, where these weapons are coming from, and it won't make any difference to that whatsoever.
When it comes to the deactivation standards, I was able to participate in a debate on this when it was almost too late. Sadly, the deactivation regulation entered into force after Paris without anyone taking another look at it to see whether it was appropriate. I would say that the standards are not appropriate. It's too complicated. It's not easy to implement. And really, I think you miss the point. If you have, at the end of this process, a lump of metal that's no good or no use to anyone, you may well ask, who needs a deactivated weapon? Who actually needs such a thing? Well, there are museums that are not publicly run or publicly owned. Some of these museums simply cannot afford the real thing. They cannot afford the genuine artifact. We have associations. We have an exhibition where it's specializing in weapons and tanks, and if you wish to display these objects, that's the core interest of the exhibition. Can you really have a situation whereby all museums will have to display only deactivated weapons? Well, then, really, when it comes to these collections that exist, will be destroyed by this. We have collections that allow us to understand the technology. We have weapons from the Middle Ages that were state-of-the-art weapons at the time. And these would have to be destroyed. Now, when you look at the private collections, I know that some of these collections are extremely valuable, and many of these extremely valuable collections would simply have to be melted down or destroyed. That's surely not what we want. And what about decorative weapons? Some of these would have to be destroyed as well. And I have to I'll put it to, what tools are we going to use to make these weapons unusable? Ordinary tools will not suffice, because then it's very easy to reactivate them. But if you're going to use more heavy-duty tools, then, that's the only way. So on a fundamental point, I would say that it's absolutely crucial to rework this directive, because clearly there are shortcomings.